Venues. So we were talking about venues today. I think that this will be helpful if you are wanting to become a talent buyer, if you are an agent, or even if you're on tour and you just want to have a better understanding of the venue that you woke up in the parking lot and you're going to in your tour bus and you're going to spend the day working in. So what I want to do is talk about some of the main characteristics. The screen sharing is paused. Why is it paused? All right, I'm going to stop the share. Oh no, I can do new share. If I do desktop. But then where did the thing go that I had up? All right, we're gonna log back into this. All kinds of technical difficulties today. Sorry, people, sorry. And present, okay. I am screen sharing. It says I am, great, all right. Now I think we're rolling. I think you can see my presentation and I think we're ready to go. So venues, I think that it's gonna be helpful for talent buyers, agents, people that are aiming to become those things, to have a good understanding of kind of the different qualities that venues have. And this is not a complete list of all venue types, but kind of the major ones where you would typically see a band or some sort of performance on a stage and an audience facing that stage and watching that performance. So I'm not really going to talk about nightclubs with bottle service or DJ venues as much. This is more, there's a stage and the audience facing it. So things that I want you to think about as we're working through these different venues is to consider the aspects that make a good performance in a venue. So a vibe that fits the art that's happening on the stage. And we're going to come back to this list at the end, and maybe I'll kind of give some more specific examples then. But you know, if you have a rock and roll vibe, you kind of want of music, you kind of want a rock and roll vibe of venue. Think about the experience that your audience wants. So do they want a reserve seat where they are willing to pay a higher ticket price so that they know they're sitting close to the stage? Or is it an audience that's comfortable paying a cheaper ticket price, but standing, and it's general admission, standing room only, and people just stand wherever they can. So ticket price and whether or not people want a reserved seat is a big component of how the audience wants to experience. Thinking about the production capabilities and the limitations. So the idea that you have for a big giant rock show, but you want to do it in an intimate coffee shop, like clearly those things aren't going to work. The production capabilities of a coffee shop are not going to allow for you know, pyro and giant video screens. So that's an extreme example. But when you're thinking about the production that you're taking out on the road, especially if you have props or stage pieces, set designs, but you're playing smaller venues, you need to make sure that your production will actually fit into the venues that you're intending to play. And then revenue potential and expenses. So we'll kind of talk about relative expensiveness of these venues, and it's really important to consider that the revenue needs to be able to cover the expenses for it to be a profitable show. So while we won't get into the nitty gritty details of that, we kind of cover that in deals and show expenses and settlement, knowing that you're selling reserved seat tickets at different ticket prices and how many tickets at each price, figuring out what that revenue potential is, and then lining that up with the corresponding expenses for the show to make sure that it makes financial sense. Looking at your artist's touring history, so where have they played in the past? What were the ticket prices in the past? What were the ticket sales? That'll help guide you on what type of room should your artist be playing on this tour. And then location can be really important. So especially in larger markets like Chicago, and Chicago is going to be kind of our reference point for the lecture today, because I'm in Chicago, and so the examples that I will be using will all be in Chicago, and you should, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, look those venues up online afterwards and take a look at kind of, you know, the nuances of the venue that you can kind of get from their websites. But location, especially in a large market, is it a suburban location? Is it a downtown location? And understanding where your audience is coming from can really play an important role in booking the right room. So those are some things to consider. And like I said, we'll talk about that again kind of at the end. We're going to start with the smallest venues and work up to larger venues. So the first one we're going to talk about is a listening room. So typically these are pretty small rooms. They're usually under about 350 capacity, and they're usually seated. Because they're seated, you can sell a reserved seat ticket. You can charge higher ticket prices. You can see in this one that there's tables, and there's usually table service and servers with sometimes food or drink. So this environment is going to lend itself to an older crowd that is willing to pay a higher ticket price and is interested in sitting and kind of having the comforts of that experience. Personally, I am falling into the category of older crowd, and I love to go to listening rooms. It is a great intimate way to see a show. And I like to, I know I work in the concert industry, but I don't like loud, crowded places. So it's to go to a place where I know that there's a little bit of space and I'm not going to be packed into a general admission venue. That's the experience that I'm typically looking for. So those are kind of the characteristics of listening rooms. Some examples in Chicago are City Winery and Old Town School of Folk Music. City Winery has locations around the country, I believe. So, and I've noticed a lot of kind of artists that are maybe acoustic or were in a band in the 90s and then are just going out as a solo act now. I'm seeing a lot of those kind of happening at listening rooms. So what you're looking at here is the seating chart for the Old Town School of Folk Music. So a seating chart or seating map is a on-paper representation of all of the tickets or seats that are available in a venue. Sometimes it'll be drawn out, and like this was probably looks like it was made in like Word or something. So I can look at this and guess based on the way that it looks that probably all of those straight lines of rows are actually a little bit curved, angling towards the stage. But it gives me enough of an idea that there's a stage and then there's some round tables right in front of it. Then there's some rows of seats on the main floor. There's a space for the soundboard at the rear with some other tables. And then there's a balcony that probably overhangs that a little bit. That has rows of seats. So if you imagine that you are kind of up on the ceiling looking down at the floor of the venue, and then it's stretched out where in real life some of these things might overlap, where the balcony would overlap the main floor. That's kind of what you're looking at with the seating chart. So these are useful for reserved seat venues when you are figuring out how many seats do you want to put at which ticket price. So you might price the balcony seats at a different price than the main floor. In this case, you might price the tables at a different price than the what look like normal theater seats. And then you might get, in a small room like this, there's probably not that many different ticket prices, but once we get to bigger rooms, you'll see there'll be opportunities to have a wide range of ticket prices in one room. So that's listening rooms. The next kind of, well, some are the same size, but the next type of venue that we're going to talk about are rock clubs. A lot of times we'll just reference these as clubs. And usually if we're in the kind of concert rock and roll world, when we say club, we mean a rock club, not a nightclub or a dance club. So these are usually general admission. So you walk in the door and everybody has paid the same price to come in, and it's up to you to decide where you want to stand. So you want to get there early and try to get right up by the front of the stage. If you're more comfortable standing in the back. When my husband and I go to shows, I will go stand up in the front with him for about 2 songs, and I say, have fun. I am going to go in the spacious back of the room, and I'll see you when it's over. So these are usually 100 to about 1,500 in capacity. The expenses are typically relatively low to put on a show there. And the way that the clubs are making a lot of their money is through the bar sales. So they need to be open in order to be generating their revenue. Since there's not a ton of ticket revenue because it's general admission, they're really getting their revenue through primarily alcohol sales. So they're going to try to fill their calendar and have the venue open as many days a month as they can. They usually have kind of a unique vibe, and a lot of times they have some neat history to them. This particular one is the Metro in Chicago, which is just an iconic rock club that's been around since the 90s, I think, the 80s. I should know the answer to that. I've been on many site visits at the Metro with my class at Columbia College Chicago, so I can't believe that I can't remember off the top of my head. They've been around about 35 or 40 years. One thing I want to talk about is what production is typically in the rooms. So in rock clubs, you're generally going to have the sound equipment will probably already be in there, and there will probably be some basic lighting. Depending on how extravagant of a show you're planning on putting on, you might bring in some additional lighting or video or backdrops or other stage elements. But a lot of times you could just show up with no sound or lights and use what they have in the venue. So some examples in Chicago. This is another picture of the Metro, the view from the stage. So Metro is about 1,150 capacity, I believe. Park West is about 1,100. And what's interesting, those two venues, very similar size, but the vibe of them inside is so different. The Park West has more of kind of an Art Deco vibe, and the Metro has kind of more of a gritty rock club vibe. Some others are Lincoln Hall. You're probably all familiar with House of Blues. There's lots of those around the country. And one that's been kind of a mainstay in Chicago for many years is called the Subterranean also. So that does not have a seating chart to look at because it's general admission, so there's nothing to show you on that front. The next larger size of venue is a general admission theater. We also will call that a GA theater, GA standing for general admission. So these are kind of like same vibe as a rock club, but just a little bit larger. And a lot of times these are old, fancy theaters that, run down is not the right word, but like aren't usually kept up to the fanciness that they were when they were originally built. The one that we're looking at here is the Riviera Theater in the Uptown neighborhood in Chicago. So these GA theaters typically have capacities of about 1,000 to 3,500, and usually the main floor, which would have originally had theater seats on it, those seats are removed. So there's usually an open general admission main floor, and usually the seats remain in the balcony. Still sold as general admission, even though there's seats there. So you buy a ticket to get in the door. It's one price for everybody usually, and you can go wherever you want in the venue, whether you want seats up in the balcony or to stand on the main floor. So there's always the capability of putting seats on the floor and selling it as a reserved seat show, but typically these theaters are function best as general admission. They're a little bit more expensive than the rock clubs, just because it's bigger, so it just costs more to open the doors. You've got more ticket takers, you've got, the stage is usually larger, the production is, the bands are usually bringing more of their own production, so there's more stage hands, so there's just additional expenses that make it more expensive than the smaller club. But because the capacity is higher, you're selling more tickets, so your revenue is potentially higher. These are less expensive than the next one that we're going to talk about, which is a proper theater. So this is the view from the stage, I think at the Vic or the Riviera in Chicago, probably. And those are a couple examples of general admission theaters in Chicago. So next, these are my favorite when I'm touring. It's my favorite tours to work on, or are ones that are in proper theaters. They are frequently beautiful and ornate, and it's like fun to wake up in the morning and you don't know what you're going to see inside. Is it going to be like, you know, the way that they are decorated can sometimes be really like neat and over the top and kind of historic feeling, and they kind of have a nicer, fancier vibe to them. So it's nice to walk into work and go, oh, wow, what a beautiful space to be in today. So I really love touring proper theaters. They are reserved seats, and the seats are, you know, bolted down to the ground like they exist in place, and they on the main floor and balconies. Because of that, you can sell reserved seats. You can sell them at a higher ticket price for some of the seats. So if the seat's closer to the stage, there's a premium that can be put on that. And if the seats are further away from the stage, they would be less expensive. Sorry, I saw somebody said something in the chat, so I need to open that up. Frequently, along with the higher ticket prices, these venues are going to be more expensive on the expense side. So the rent will be higher. You'll typically be bringing in, a lot of times they will have sound in them already, especially if they're historic buildings. They will hang the sound and it will just remain there kind of all the time. But you'll see the tours are bringing in larger productions on the lighting side, video, backdrops, those things. So you're going to have more stagehands. And these rooms are typically union stagehands, which are just inherently usually more expensive than non-union stagehands. So it just kind of raises the prices of everything. Along with it being reserved seating, you then have ushers, more ticket takers, and there's just more security access points based on the size of the venues. So there's just all around kind of more expenses. But that's offset by the higher ticket prices and the higher revenue potential. Usually they are about 1,500 to 4,000 capacity. And yeah, like I said, they have like kind of a nicer, fancier vibe a lot of times. Oh, I clicked on that thing, so now I have to click that. Okay, this is a view of the Chicago Theater. There are some examples in Chicago. The Chicago Theater, which was originally a movie house. So what's interesting about that is the stage is actually not very deep. So you don't see very many Broadway or musical productions touring through there because of the depth of the stage. It's only like 32 feet. So there's some production limitations on what kind of performances, what kind of shows can best play there. But Chicago has a gazillion places to play, so just around the corner and down the street is the Goodman Theater. There's the Auditorium Theater, Cadillac Palace. There's lots of theaters in Chicago, so if the production doesn't fit into the Chicago Theater, there are other places very nearby that it can play. So the Chicago Theater mostly has concerts and comedians and sometimes community events like college graduations or whatever. Another type of theater to know about are called PACs, PAC, which is short for Performing Arts Center. These are typically not-for-profit theaters that are focused on the performing arts, and will also probably have some concerts coming through. And these will typically sell a season of theatrical and musical performances. So you can buy a subscription for the season. And then they'll fill in their calendar with other one-day performances maybe that are coming through. So looking at the seating map for a proper theater, frequently you'll see it broken up into 2 or 3 sections because there will be a balcony, which will be represented up at the top of the page. There will be a lot of times a mezzanine, which is kind of like a middle level, and then the main floor. So I'm going to zoom in on this so that you can see it better. This is the one for the Chicago Theater. And I want to note when you get a seating map like this and you see these numbers that have an X before them, those are called the X sections. And that is the order that the ticketing system will sell the best available tickets. So if you are buying a ticket and you just say you want the best available, it'll first check section X1. If there's no seats available there, it'll check X2, and then X3, X4, on and on. So what's interesting about that is if you are trying to figure out how to price the tickets, a human had to decide what those X sections were and actually went out and like checked each seat and kind of decided should it be part of this section or that section based on what is the bestness of that seat if you're looking for the best available. So if you're trying to figure out how to price the seats and you haven't been to the venue before, it can be really helpful to look at the X sections, because you know a human went out and decided that section X6, which you'll notice is in the middle, is better seats than section X7. And you'll notice that the middle sections are considered better than the ones that are further out. So even on this second row, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but on the second row, you've got the 5 and 6 in the middle, then you've got 7 and 8 on the further outside. But then the next best seats are further back, but in the center. And then later on, it skips up to X13 for the ones that are kind of further around on the side. So keeping an eye on those, if that's available. When I was booking shows in venues that I had not been to, it was really helpful to use that as a way to kind of understand how good are these seats. An X300 is usually, a lot of times, that's the orchestra pit. And so seats can be placed there, or if it's a performance that requires an orchestra, those are temporary seats that would be moved so that the orchestra could be there. So that's why that's like kind of like a funny number, but that would certainly get told to sell first as best available. Our next venue size is an arena. So in the United States, typically we call indoor venues that were originally built for sporting events arenas. Then we called outdoor venues that were typically built for sporting events stadiums. But sometimes in other parts of the world, those words can be interchanged or flip-flopped, and they kind of mean the same thing. But generally, when we say arena, we're talking about indoors. When we say stadium, we're talking about outdoors. So these can be, for a long time, they were really building just like large capacity ones that were more in the 15 to 20,000 range. And then there was a period of time where fewer artists were playing that size, and there was just more of a demand for arenas that were more in a 7,500, 10,000 capacity range. So there was kind of an era where a bunch of those kind of got built. They can host a variety of events. So everything from monster trucks and ice shows, rodeos, obviously sports, so basketball teams, hockey teams. So these are obviously like very popular places for large concerts to be held. They're really flexible because while they don't have any in-house production, you're gonna bring all of your own production, all of your sound, all of your lights. A lot of times they will have square or rectangular stage pieces. They can build a rectangular stage if you're not carrying your own more elaborate custom staging. So you can go either way on that. But they're really flexible because you can configure them with curtaining systems, and a lot of the newer arenas have already had those built in. So you can you can decide where you want to put the stage. Do you want to end like you're seeing in this picture? Do you want to put it in the center of the arena floor and have the audience all the way around the stage? If it's the right size building, but a little bit too big, but that's kind of the only option in the market, you can move that stage further down the arena floor and then curtain behind it, so you don't even see the empty half of the arena that you're not putting those tickets available for sale. Or you can curtain off the third level. So the curtaining systems make the venue feel and appear smaller, which is a better experience for both the artists and the fans. You know, nobody wants to go to a show where half of the arena is empty. So, but if that is the venue that makes the most sense for other reasons, the flexibility of these curtaining systems can really take a large venue and make it feel like a lot of different sizes, which I think is a great characteristic. These are much more expensive, typically union facilities, and you're gonna have generally reserved seats, at least in the seats. Sometimes you'll have artists that want to do a general admission floor, but other times, like as you can see in this picture, seats can be placed on the floor and the entire venue can be sold as reserved seats. So looking at the seating map for the Sears Center, they've got it color-coded for the seats on the floor, and then the first level, and then the second level. So you might look at this and think, oh, well, let's put all the green seats at one price and all the red seats at another price and all the blue seats at a third price. But I think that when you're pricing tickets, relative distance to the stage is important. So it makes more sense to kind of maybe put on the floor, the first half of the floor could be at one price and the second half of the floor is at a second price. Then maybe, you know, sections C100 through 103 are at a particular price, and then 104 through 114 are at a lower price because they're much further back. So while you might receive seating maps that have it color coded like this, if you're figuring out the revenue potential for the show, if you're a talent buyer or you're an agent, like you can play around with what seats are at what price, and thinking about creative ways to do that while being the most kind of accurate you can on setting a fair price for those seats can really affect what your revenue potential is. The next largest size that we're kind of going to look at are amphitheaters. So these are typically outdoor venues, and they can really range from 5,000 to like 50,000 capacity. So this one we're looking at here is the Pritzker Pavilion in downtown Chicago. So it is a not-for-profit amphitheater that's like owned by the city of Chicago. It can be rented out, and you can put fences and gates up around it and sell tickets like it's a normal amphitheater, like a normal venue. But it's designed for like the CSO, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra plays there, and lots of performing arts things happen there. And one of the main components that I'm going to come back to this, but that you can see in this picture is these venues are kind of defined by there being like a covered pavilion with seats up front and then a large lawn in the back. So the seats will usually be sold at reserved seat ticket prices, and then the lawn would be general admission. Oops, I went the wrong way. So you can definitely scale the ticket prices in these venues. The ones that promoters own, which are mostly owned by Live Nation, but there's a few that are owned independently around the country. Those for-profit amphitheaters owned by promoters, we typically call sheds. And let's see what else do I want to say about that. Obviously, they're seasonal. So you've got potential weather concerns, and different venues are going to have different amounts of covering or shelter to protect from the weather. Some examples in Chicago, we got the Pritzker Pavilion that we just talked about. Ravinia is a really neat venue that has like a lawn that everybody brings picnic tables, like little wine and cheese picnics to hang out on the lawn. The Hollywood Casino Amphitheater has a different name every year, so it's hard to keep track of what it's called, but that's what it's currently called. That's the Live Nation owned amphitheater in Tinley Park. And then there's also the Huntington Bank Pavilion at Northerly Island that also has a different name every year. So the reason that the names change is that's a sponsorship opportunity where the venues can sell the naming rights to the venue. Now, I really like it when they do things like Huntington Bank Pavilion at Northerly Island, because now I know where it is. I can know where Northerly Island is. But every year it's a different bank that has the naming rights. It's the First Midwest Pavilion, it's the Credit Union, whatever. It's hard to keep track of like what is that actual venue. And sometimes I've had people like go to the wrong venue because there's two named after banks in Chicago sometimes. But that's why you'll see the naming changes, because the sponsorship naming rights to the venue, that sponsorship deal is for a certain amount of time. And okay, so looking at a seating map, so amphitheaters are typically built for the purpose of concerts or other performances, and you can see that when we're looking at the seating map. So you've got the stage, and then everything's pointed at the stage, and you've got the ability to sell the reserved seats up closer, and then general admission lawn in the back. So there's usually not sightline issues. It's all aimed at a stage, unlike a venue that was designed primarily or originally for sporting events. Looks much different. So if you have outgrown the amphitheaters because you can sell more than 30 or 50,000 tickets at a time, you'll move on to stadiums. So this is clearly a football stadium. These are outdoor venues, can range from about 10,000 to 100,000 in capacity, and were originally built for sporting events. So they're not going to have any in-house production. They're not going to have a stage. You're going to have to bring absolutely everything. Obviously, you can scale it because you see that there's reserved seats. The floor is probably going to have reserved seats on it. I don't know if I've ever really seen a general admission floor on a stadium, but it's going to be very expensive. But also, you're selling 100,000 tickets, you're going to have the revenue that covers those expenses. Wrigley Field has started having, and that's, I believe this is a picture of Wrigley Field. It is, because I see the W flag flying there, which is what the Cubs, when the Cubs win, fly the W. So Wrigley Field is having a lot more concerts than they used to, and it is such an iconic space in Chicago that everybody got super jazzed when they started holding concerts there, because it's really neat to have that experience of like going to this like familiar, you know, baseball loved venue that's old and has been around forever and has such character, and to be able to go see a concert there. So a lot of times, I mean, shows that are playing there, people just like to have the experience of going to a show at Wrigley. And obviously they're going to love the band also, but I think that a venue like that helps drive ticket sales as well. Soldier Field, where the Bears play, Toyota Park, is an outdoor soccer stadium that they actually built with concerts in mind. They built it with a cement slab at one end to be used for concerts and a loading dock. So it really has nice concert capabilities. I don't know that a lot of stuff is playing there. Hawthorne Racetrack, and then minor league baseball parks, where I spent a number of summers of my life, are smaller baseball parks, usually more in the 10,000 capacity range. And there's several of those around Chicago as well. And those are a really interesting opportunity to take a space that has lots of days that it's sitting open and not being used, and find a way to use that existing infrastructure of, they've got concession stands, they've got bathrooms, they've got seats. You put if it's got the ability to put a stage on the field, you can do that. So kind of unique venues, and it was personally very fun to work on the baseball parks. So looking at a seating chart of what that looks like, typically you'll see that the stage will be in center field. There will be reserved seating sections on the field. When we did Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson, and when we did the minor league baseball parks, we did general admission for the whole thing. So while you might not see that at Wrigley or at Soldier Field or one of like the large stadiums, totally doable at kind of in a smaller, more contained space. And I think sometimes we might have sold tickets. We had a limited number of tickets that could go onto the field. It's been a long time since I've done this, I don't recall, but I'm pretty sure you either bought a field ticket or a general admission ticket for the stands, and then you could go sit wherever you wanted. You'll notice pretty much no baseball park ever will let you do anything on their infield, so that's why it looks like there's kind of like a big gap, but they spend millions of dollars on players, and maintaining the infield to be able to be just absolutely perfection, and especially safe for their players, is of the highest importance for venues whose primary role is to host baseball games. And then there's all kinds of other places that you can think about putting a show. So this is a living room show, which expenses are super low. You're providing an intimate experience for fewer people, so you can kind of charge a higher ticket price. So for an artist like this is David Bazan doing an acoustic set in my friend Mike's living room a bunch of years ago. For a situation like that, it can be more profitable to play a living room to fewer people, but slightly higher ticket prices with virtually no expenses. That can make more financial sense than playing to 200 people at a rock club with a lower ticket price and more expenses that go along with it. If you're starting out looking at booking your own shows, think about interesting places that your music would be a good fit. Coffee houses, breweries, there's lots of options out there that can align with your type of music. So going back to look at some of the things to consider, that vibe that fits the art that's on the stage, super important. I like to give I like dramatic examples. So imagine a proper theater that has all of the rows of nice fancy velvet seats, but you put a screamo metal band on stage that likes to do Walls of Death, where they tell the audience to split up Braveheart style and then like run at each other. It's a thing. But I like to always imagine like running through the little aisles of, the rows of seats to try to like run at each other. Like, obviously, a screamo metal band is not a good fit for a proper theater. That's a type of music, and the experience that the audience wants is going to be a standing room, general admission experience, because it's a very active audience and they're going to want to move around, as opposed to something that is an audience that wants to sit and know that they have purchased a particular seat, and they know where they're going to be, and they know that they have their own piece of real estate at the show, and sit and watch something on stage. So understanding the vibe of what's happening on the stage and the experience that the audience wants, I think, is really key. And that's where local promoters are a great resource when you are trying to book shows. If you're not familiar with all the rooms, rely on your local promoters. What they know is what vibe of each room and what kind of genres are typically playing in those rooms, and what experience the audience knows to expect in going to those venues. So local promoters are the experts in what is the right room for a variety of reasons, and that being one of them. The production capabilities and limitations, talking again about making sure that your production, especially if you have big set pieces, is going to fit into the venues that you are choosing to book. That is good advanced planning and will alleviate problems on the day of. It's no fun to show up at a place and, oh no, we can't put our production in here. And that might even be things like you have, you want to hang your lighting rig from the ceiling and from the structure of the building. Some venues don't have that capability. So there's other ways that you can hang that lighting truss, but from the ground. But understanding what the capabilities of the venues are before you commit to renting a bunch of equipment and bringing it on the road with you, super important. We talked throughout about matching up that revenue potential with the expenses. So making sure that it makes financial sense and figuring out how can you manipulate the expenses, how can you manipulate the revenue for those things for it to be a successful show. Looking at what the artist has done in the past. So, and having a plan for not just this tour, but where you're trying to get to the next tour. When we talk in the routing workshop, the routing part 2, Dave Shapiro was talking about that, where he's thinking as an agent, he's thinking about what his artists are playing several tours down the line, and what do we need to do now to accomplish those goals. So then taking the artist's history and understanding what are their ticket prices, how many tickets will they sell, and putting those things all together. And then location, like I said, we have lots of great venues in downtown Chicago. We also have a lot of great venues in the suburbs. And if you are doing a performance that's aimed at kids that you want to do in a theater, you might want to go with a more suburban location. There's more children and families that live in the suburbs typically. They're able to get there usually with a car. So understanding where's your audience traveling from, and trying to fit that in. On the flip side, if you're doing, you can do rock shows anywhere, but there's definitely like some of the more iconic venues are going to be in the city, and that's the experience that people are going to kind of know and expect for some of those city venues. So location close to transportation, and understanding who's coming to the show, and how are they kind of going to get there can go into selecting the right venue for your artist. So if you have any questions, please throw them in. I see that got somebody that said hi and would like to connect. So there's that in the chat. Thanks for putting this together. Oh, yes. So these slides, Jonah, will be available. So if you go to jenkellogg.com, this presentation will be on the venues workshop. So if you go to past, it'll move to past workshops, and I will have this presentation will be on there, and then also the video recording of this whole workshop will be on there. Also, I have on there a link to a TED Talk by David Byrne, which hopefully you guys had a chance to check out before this workshop, but if not, that's fine. I highly suggest checking it out after. It's a really interesting look at how venues evolved over time, how the music played in venues evolved because of the changes in venues. It's about how the sound and the architecture go together. Great TED Talk. So I think that check that out, and don't have any more questions. I will thank you all for spending this time with me. I really appreciate that you give me your time, and I hope that I shed some light on some of the details of the different kinds of venues. And we will be back next Friday. We're going to do our first office hours mentoring session workshop, which I'm super excited about. So I've got David 51 Norman is going to be joining me. He's been a tour manager for many years. I also have Lisa Brownlee, who's also been a tour manager for many years. 2 tour managers are joining me. It's going to be them as panelists along with myself. And then if you are interested in having us mentor you live about touring, production crew specifically, if that's something that you are interested in getting into, or something that you are working in but want to elevate your career, if you go to my website, I've got a spot for you to fill out a form to sign up to appear, and I will reach out to you and line you up in advance to make sure that you are available to come on live, and you will tell us about your situation, and we will hopefully offer you super helpful advice that will help you soar as you progress in your career. So thank you, and you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you next Friday at noon.